We were doing a pre-seed, or calling it a pre-seed of 1.5 million. We walked away with 750K. So we didn't do very well from a fundraising point of view. Looking back, there's quite a few reasons. The idea was never to build this kind of startup that had raised a little bit. We didn't even need the conviction that the thing that we were working on at that point in time was the thing that's gonna work and take off. It was like, do you know what? If we just dedicate some time to this and we push the solution in a direction that makes sense in a market that's big enough, we kind of trust ourselves to figure it out and make that work. And we made a million mistakes, obviously, from start to finish, but we obviously did a few things right. I just became obsessed with creating the most revenue efficient B2B SaaS company that I could, with the eventual aim of just creating a really, really efficient asset. Again, it didn't start like that per se.
Welcome to 23 Mile with me, Kayode Odeleye. Today we're joined by Williamson. In an era where some founders raise many millions of dollars and spend most of it on ads in an attempt at blitzscaling, Matt and his team did the exact opposite. Vizzly, the startup he co-founded, raised less than $1 million, spent zero on marketing, survived a 100% churn rate, and then still ended up exiting to one of the world's largest advertising groups in just under 3 years. Vizzly was part of Y Combinator's summer 2022 batch. 6 weeks before demo day, every single customer had churned. The team pivoted the entire product under pressure and came out on the other side, but still ended up failing with the seed round, as they raised far less than they targeted. A year later, Matt realized that failure was one of the best things that could have happened to them. In October 2024, Matt and his co-founders sold Vizzly to WPP's Game Theory. A 4-person company ended up being acquired by one of the world's largest advertising groups. He's called the outcome life-changing, a result he attributes directly to keeping his preference stack small and his equity high. On the show today, we'll discuss the pros and cons of raising excess capital, how to build efficient go-to-market with minimal spend, and why failing fast and pivoting can be a winning strategy. We'll also briefly touch on insights from the exit. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Cody, and I appreciate the invite and you having me here.
Cool. Congrats on the exit. It's been a while now. We'll get to that, but maybe just starting at the very beginning. It would be great to hear from you what growing up was like, and if there were any early influences that kind of influenced your path towards entrepreneurship.
Yeah, sure. So I guess, Luke, I used to watch like YC videos when I was like 19 or 20. I was one of those guys long before I decided to found Vizzly. Always had a bit of an appetite for entrepreneurship. You think little things as a kind of teenager you do, I think, really stem from a kind of long-standing desire to found my own business one day. But yeah, the first kind of venture that I started was Vizzly, and that was with my co-founder, James Bowers, who we met both at Duffel, which is also a YC company, focusing largely on flights and payments. It was a flights and payments API platform. And yeah, we both spent around a year at Duffel, and over a couple of beers after work one day, just kind of got chatting. I had the kind of initial concept for Vizzly in my head, was kind of looking for a co-founder at that point, and I will say trying to find the right co-founder is mission impossible, so very blessed to have found James so early. And yeah, I kind of, even just before we had anything that even resembled MVP, both quit our jobs and just went fully into it, and just very much loved the process of that kind of early stage of development. The idea of, I think we just got so much energy from the idea of building a business. The process very much was a roller coaster, but yeah, absolutely something that I'd always wanted to do from a very early age.
How did you end up in University of Mississippi?
Yeah, it's a great question. So yeah, I was at Ole Miss. So if you've seen the movie The Blind Side, Ole Miss is the school. But no, I wanted to go on scholarship to an American college to play tennis. But I got quite badly injured when I was like 17, 18, so stopped playing tennis, but still had this idea of wanting to go to the US and experience college life there. How often does the opportunity arise where you get to go and spend like 6 months in Mississippi, Oxford, Mississippi, and experience life in the deep south? So not very often, which is why I kind of opted to go down that route. And also just, I love the music down there as well, across like Nashville, New Orleans, Memphis. I think it's just, a wicked culture of music. So yeah, not that too deep, I'm afraid. But yeah, I don't regret that decision at all. It was an amazing time.
That's amazing. But then, I mean, when you finished, what your first job, if I get it right, was in go-to-market at Coach Sick.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
Yeah, so yeah, I was very much a kind of tennis player growing up, and what that kind of meant was, one of my first jobs was coaching tennis and restringing tennis rackets, and so I was very much involved in that side. So Coach League, by the way, was a platform for tennis coaches, basically to do like booking, scheduling, payment, that sort of thing. And so I was looking for work coming out of tennis coaching, trying to go into software. I was kind of also doing it through the lens of just wanting to speak to founders, tech founders who had gone through that early stage of 0 to 1, who could maybe just kind of give me a little bit of like what that's like, as someone who had literally no idea at that point in time, but just wanted to learn. And then managed to get in touch with the chairman at Coach Seek at the time, who kind of kindly invited me out to New Zealand to come and work for them. Long story short, at the beginning of that role, I was very much just a kind of glorified SDR, just on the phones, just calling different tennis coaches. So yeah, that kind of developed into a more well-rounded go-to-market role, so focusing also on things like content, SEO at the time, a bit PPC, as well as still on the phones, ringing coaches, and so literally anything and everything in terms of how we push products, push content, and ultimately get people to buy.
I mean, you've said it in passing, but there is something very impressive there, where you literally just rang up the chairman of the company, and they're flying you from Scotland, if I get it right, to New Zealand to take up this job.
Oh, I had to fly myself over. I was just offered the job, but yeah, no, yeah, for me it was a no-brainer. Like, New Zealand's a beautiful country. Why wouldn't I want to go and work there for a little bit as a young man? But no, like the super kind of early stage company and the super early on in my career. So yeah, financially certainly not the most kind of like lucrative thing, but I think there's absolutely a time to learn and a time to earn, and that phase of my career is very much all just about learning from the best people, the most exciting, ambitious, energetic people, and just surrounding myself with characters like that who I could just learn from, but also on a project where I could just get my teeth stuck into. And so as someone who came from who's basically a tennis coach trying to get into software and a kind of startup life, that was just the perfect bridge for me to kind of make that transition. And incredibly fortuitous, and I'm incredibly fortunate and lucky. I still chat with a bunch of the guys from that company who are now often doing various things and are all kind of interestingly quite successful. But yeah, one of those experiences where I look back on, I'm just incredibly grateful for.
Amazing. And then from Coach Sick, you worked at Skyscanner and then Duffel, where, like you mentioned earlier on, you met James. How was that transition between those three, I'll say, startups, different scale of startups?
Yeah, the transition from Coach Seek into Skyscanner was probably the most drastic. So started in the B2B outfit, so basically just distributing Skyscanner's API to third-party platforms who wanted to sell flights or other travel verticals at Skyscanner operated at that point in time, like accommodation. At that point in time, though, I was kind of learning how to code a little bit, so I was starting to write a lot in Python, a bit in SQL, typically doing a lot of my own data tasks. And I was kind of fortunate at that point in time, really early on in my career. I think it was like maybe I was like a year or two deep into Skyscanner. That the commercial lead for data products had left. And we built it out. It became more than just data feeds. It became a suite of analytics products, where I was very much involved in a product capacity and in a commercial capacity. We grew out what was originally a modest revenue base into something that was pretty impressive considering the size of the team. We obviously recruited more commercial people into the team that I ended up looking after. So a massive accelerant in my career, and not just from a kind of promotional point of view, but absolutely from, and again, the main thing at that stage of my life, really, from a learning point of view. And again, I think I just very much had the mentality of like, as long as this is serving me from a learning and development point of view, and as long as I feel like I'm kind of aggressively progressing through that lens, then, you know, I'm happy to be here. But at the same time, it was, you know, fantastic from a career development point of view too. Once that had kind of, once I felt I had extracted as much learning and as I possibly could from that environment, just around COVID really, I saw Duffel come along. There wasn't even a job available at Duffel, to be honest. I just saw what they were doing, saw what they're building, I saw the team involved, and I reached out. Skyscanner was the only job vacancy I think I've applied to ever. But as I kind of, you know, I'm from Scotland originally. Skyscanner was Scotland's unicorn, the kind of the most exciting tech company you could possibly work for in Scotland. So of course I'm going to apply. But Duffel, yeah, no, I saw the founding team, saw the kind of problem they're trying to solve, and I just thought that was, you know, super interesting. They're trying to displace like in travel, in the context of travel, more specifically flights. You have three main systems like Amadeus, Sabre, Travelport. They pretty much have a kind of oligopoly, if you will. Amadeus pretty much have most of the market share, so it's essentially a monopoly these days. But the idea of joining this small team that have raised, you know, a bunch of money to try and displace this this kind of super traditional incumbent set of players was just, yeah, a really exciting prospect, and just wanted to go and be a part of that journey. And I was going to convince that I was going to learn a heap in the process, going to work for a Series A, Series B company, where obviously I'd spent about 5 years working at Skyscanner, which was pre and post acquisition anyway. So yeah, it was just a kind of another learning opportunity really. Again, career progression is important. Money was, you know, it's important of course, but the main kind of objective really was just learning, development, knowing at some point I wanted to start my own thing, and I was just trying to soak up as much information from the best people I could probably.
And like you mentioned earlier on, it was at Duffel that you met James. So what was it that, I mean, and you mentioned as well that you had there was no MVP where both of you decided we go diving in headfirst. What gave you this conviction in the idea you were working on to be able to just go all in?
Yeah, like, look, I look back in that period of my life and I'm just like, that was so naive. Like, what on earth were you thinking? Yeah, so look, like I said before, James and I had a couple of beers after work one day. I shared the idea with him. I'd spoken to like a handful of prospective co-founders before that, and just didn't really feel right. Didn't really feel the vibe. Didn't really feel maybe they were serious, or they maybe weren't at the right point in their life, rather, or from a career point of view, or from a kind of personal point of view. James, I think, woke up and told me that he started working in this concept that we were talking about the night before, and at that point I knew he was pretty serious, and the attitude was just fantastic, and it has always been really kind of from start to finish, and generally kind of worked super well together as a consequence of us just both being equally as hungry. But no, look, I think in terms of what gives you conviction to basically kind of step into full-time entrepreneurship depends on so many factors. Like, we were both pretty young, both in our 20s when we started Vizzly. We didn't have a mortgage, didn't have kids. those decisions are much easier when you don't have these things to kind of to worry or think about. Also, these are two people that both really wanted to just dive into entrepreneurship because they wanted to do it. And it wasn't necessarily, again, massively financially motivated. It does eventually become that over time, especially at the point of exit. But no, it was very much a kind of something that we both just really, really wanted to do. And I think we didn't even need the conviction that the thing that we were working on at that point in time was the thing that's gonna work and take off. It was like, do you know what? If we just dedicate some time to this, some time to solving a problem, and we push the solution in a direction that makes sense in a market that's big enough, we kind of trust ourselves to figure it out and make that work. And we made a million mistakes, obviously, from start to finish, but we obviously did a few things right. Yeah, I think part of the process also is just kind of trusting yourself to figure it out along the way, assuming you, again, can financially support your circumstance.
Understand. Maybe in a nutshell, what was Vizzly? What was the problem you set out to solve, and what was the product? In your words, in a nutshell.
Sure. So, like 95%, if not slightly more, of B2B SaaS platforms have a reporting page or analytics page in their application. They have two options: build in-house or purchase an off-the-shelf product. Maybe about at the point of starting Vizzly, the options were pretty limited. It was like you could get like a third-party product you can just embed and stick it in an iframe inside your application, and there's just a bunch of product technical issues with that cause a bunch of usability problems. But again, like the alternative is build in-house. That's going to take up like 6 to 9 months of development resource potentially. So we just wanted to provide a middle ground, something that would allow developers to build and deploy analytics for their SaaS app in a fraction of the time, but in a way where they don't have to compromise end user experience, and they can build something that they're generally and genuinely rather happy and content with, but they don't have to make all those sacrifices and compromises to their product.
Wonderful. I mean, and how did you and James have a significant amount of savings in those early days to fund the development, the marketing, and the upkeep? What was it like in those early days?
So, yeah, like neither of us were coming from a kind of position of wealth, right? We're both just kind of, both in our 20s that had worked in tech for like 5-6 years. And so, again, it's all relative. We probably bootstrapped for like 2-3 months. I'm not even sure if you can call that bootstrapping. We just hadn't raised money for 2-3 months. We did raise a very small angel round before YC, just to give us enough runway for 1 year as we kind of figure it out. But it was very much raise what you need, and then really just to give ourselves a little bit of breathing space to figure out, again, like validate the problem that we're solving. Because again, first time we'd ever done this really, so it was all new to us. And the kind of idea of raising what you need just seemed to make a little bit of sense to us, give us a little breathing room. Obviously kept salary like bare minimal. I actually don't even think we paid ourselves anything until we got into YC, and even when we got into YC, the salary was only just covering rent really, and everything else felt like it was just coming out of the savings, bleeding. A little bit from a kind of financial point of view, but obviously like that changes and stuff. You raise a little bit more money, you feel you can pay yourself a bit more, and give yourself a bit more kind of sustainable existence. But yeah, I actually don't know if that answers your question.
No, but it does. I mean, that's fine. I mean, but talking about YC, I mean, if I get the timeline right, it's only a few months from launching to getting into YC, which is a great achievement. I mean, maybe YC has a probably 1 to 2% admission rate. What did you do right from a traction and idea point of view that you think got you into YC?
I think the process of getting to YC for many still feels like a bit of a black box, especially first time applicant, having not gone through YC, not really knowing the core principles in which they base applications often from. But I think we chose I think we had a pretty well defined problem in a market that was big enough. I think our the profiles of having worked at a familiar company to YC, Duffel. There were also the kind of Duffel was the kind of like a byproduct of some Go Cardless founders, which again was a YC company. So from that point of view, there's familiarity. So you have familiarity, you have a large market, you have a very well-defined problem, and you have founders there that know what it's like to work for a YC company, which I think can answer the question of ability to cope with certain levels of work intensity. At least maybe that's the assumption. And I think what YC are ultimately looking for is just ambitious founders that can persist over time through various different levels of discomfort. And I think that's probably, I think anyway, what they maybe saw. It was much less about traction or much less about how much revenue are you doing at the point of application. I think it's much more of a kind of softer components, softer elements they look at to evaluate if that founder can last the journey, can last over time, if they're going to produce something, that's going to ultimately return the fund plus more, which obviously, we were by like absolutely not a kind of unicorn startup. But I will say that even within our kind of cohort and our peers, you could see that there was a huge shared ambition across all founders in that cohort that just wanted to build and just wanted to do as much they could to make their startup work. And I think whatever set of characteristics those founders have is definitely kind of ultimately what makes a YC founder.
Amazing. You mentioned in some of your writings that YC was expensive, but tell us, was it worth it?
Yeah, 1,000,000%. Like it's expensive, but you're a first-time founder and you don't know what you're doing. So yeah, it's expensive from an equity point of view, dilution point of view, but I would absolutely not change any decision we made accepting YC going into that. I think it was honestly one of the most kind of amazing experiences I've had in my kind of professional life. So yeah, like absolutely worth it. I think as a second-time founder or a third-time founder, if you had already gone through the process of YC, I don't know if it maybe is rewarding. If you already have that experience, you already have that network. But I would encourage founders, especially young founders who are maybe kind of, especially for the first time, that they haven't done it before, maybe they're kind of in second-time foundership, to absolutely apply and just kind of enjoy the process of it.
I mean, you raise a great point around experienced founders. I'll come back to that, but back to your experience with YC. Can you tell us what were those major things that you took away from the process that makes you say this is absolutely worth it?
Yeah, I think people probably maybe think about mentorship and speaking with these kind of celebrity founders who are now partners at YC, and the feedback and input they give is world class and it's amazing. But I think ultimately it's your peers in your cohort that are the asset. It's inspirational to look around the room and be like, to see all these amazing people building really cool things with such aggression and desire to do well, and their willingness to help each other as well. But there's a really nice balance, people willing to help each other, but you're also kind of competitive with one another as well. But that for me was a huge asset of just having this kind of network of incredible founders around you in San Francisco, all within a very, very small, dense radius.
Correct. I mean, YC is also famous for successful exited repeat founders actually coming back in through the program. So do you think, I mean, for you now, you kind of touched on that early on, but do you think if you were ever doing anything major, ambitious, would you go back to YC?
I think just to my earlier point, like having gone through that process, knowing what that process looks like, the value of that process, the network which we now have as YC alumni, I wouldn't necessarily go through that a second or third time. Never say never, but it wouldn't be something that I would, at this stage anyway, initially gravitate towards, having already done it.
Okay. But yeah, then let's talk about the interesting journey itself. From some of your writings, you talk about having a product and then having an initial interest. Maybe let's start from there. Let's talk about the MVP process and your validation and the initial interest you saw from customers. Walk us through that initial process of validating and building the product.
Look, it's quite funny when you look back at it now, but I think during YC we went, there's like this week-long retreat in Sonoma in this wine valley. It's gorgeous, and we started to speak with a partner, a mentor there, and obviously other founders, their partners, mentors. And there's this kind of real push to just launch as soon as possible. Launch fast, iterate quickly, iterate fast, and don't hold back and drop your ego. And I think we took that advice and we went back to San Francisco after the retreat, worked on the product for another week, just shipping product as quickly as possible, trying to get the kind of MVP into a usable state so that if people churn, it wasn't a function of, is this thing even usable? It was a function of, people just don't want the solution for this problem that we've got identified. And so, again, directionally, I believe the problem that we were solving was consistent from start to finish, but the solution we chose to address that problem was different. So we were very much kind of offering these individual embeddable charting components, obviously attached to a customer's database with authentication. And it was just, is it a kind of no-code tool? Is it a developer tool? What the fuck is it, And so we weren't even sure. I think there was just maybe a kind of lack of certainty over who our ICP was, so our kind of ideal customer profile, at the point of launch. And I think it was very much a question that we struggled to answer in the super kind of early days, pre-launch. That launch really helped us identify. I think having a kind of 80 odd signups gave us a little bit of validation that this problem does exist, and the way we're able to articulate the problem resonates with a decent size, decent number of SaaS companies, of B2B SaaS companies, but ultimately how we've opted to address that and translate that into product didn't resonate. And so we actually didn't pivot in that moment. We probably fell into the kind of sunk cost fallacy for at least 2 or 3 weeks after, trying to just make it work. Thinking, oh, do you know what, maybe they just churn because the product's not mature enough. It's not that it doesn't address the problem as such. But I do remember hopping on a call with a prospective customer. I think this is maybe like the 3rd or 4th call we've had with them. And it's like one of those calls you're looking for feedback. And I remember getting to the 3rd or 4th call and the chief product officer almost shouting us down the phone, saying that we come to them with the same solution, just a little bit more developed every time, and we aren't really taking on the feedback, we aren't really listening to them, and we aren't really translating that into the product that they want. And what they wanted was an embeddable dashboarding tool that users could customize, which is obviously kind of not what we were developing. But it is what Vizzly became, and it was very much the kind of the Vizzly's initial proposition post pivot was embeddable dashboards users could customize to give SaaS users like endless freedom and flexibility, even if they didn't have massive amounts of data literacy. We then launched that to the YC community just to see if it resonate with other B2B SaaS companies. It did, and we had about 3 or 4 customers that converted into paying customers pre-demo day. And for us, that was just, worlds apart from where we were, at least at the start of the YC journey. And I think at that point, we were maybe doing around like 3 or 4K MRR post YC going to demo day, which again is fairly modest, but considering our journey, it felt pretty validating. So I think it wasn't a hard pivot as such. It was a very soft pivot. Again, the problem we were solving was kind of the same. How we addressed it was very, very different. But I think it's like so hard sometimes to know when to pivot and when not to pivot. And I think ultimately it just comes down to just dropping your ego, and really just trying to be super receptive to like the right feedback, not all feedback, because you'll get pulled in a million different directions if you accept all feedback, but accepting feedback with purpose, with no ego, essentially, is probably the lesson I take away from that one.
I mean, a couple of, you touched on a lot of very great points there, validating that the problem exists in the first place, which is a totally different thing from the fact that your solution meets what exactly customers want, being able to listen to the right feedback, and then pivoting, like you said, soft pivot of the product there. Some great points there, which we could dive into, or maybe I'll come back to that. But moving on from this, I'll say quote unquote successful shift towards what customers wanted. You have paying customers, and then demo day is coming. What's your thought process for you and James at this point? Are you seeing this as a very scalable opportunity? Are you looking to raise tons of money with like the rest of your YC costs? Or how are you thinking at this point in time in terms of funding?
Yeah, look, we were on the venture train. We wanted to raise more money. We were doing a pre-seed, or calling it a pre-seed, of 1.5 million. We walked away with 750K. Like we just messed up the seed round, or pre-seed round, I should say. So we didn't do very well from a fundraising point of view. I think we were, looking back, there's quite a few reasons, some of which obviously I'd action and do differently, but the idea was never to build this kind of startup that had raised a little bit, but made good money, low pref stack, no board seats, look for an early exit. We were on the venture train, and it just so happened that when we messed up the pre-seed round, that we ended up down the road we did. But we did have a conversation with Tom Blomfield after we had just said we'd been fundraising for like 3-4 weeks, and it kind of felt like it was time to just focus back on the product and revenue. And Tom had mentioned, you know what, guys, just pause now, get to 20K MRR and go back into market and raise more funds like you had initially intended to, once you validated further and the product's a bit more mature and de-risked. We got to 20K MRR and just kind of thought, you know what, like, we still had a bunch of the pre-seed in the bank. Like, do we even need more funds? Maybe not. Let's just see how this goes. And so before you know it, we've got to 50K MRR. And we're profitable with like the number of people we had at that point in time. And we had a bunch of VCs sniffing around at that point. We just carried on, knowing that we didn't need the extra funding. There wasn't an awful lot of competitive pressure either. It's not necessarily like we existed in some hyper-competitive AI market where it's winner takes all. It was absolutely not a winner takes all market, which I think is also like a big consideration. So fundraising, like, do I need to fundraise? Do I not need to fundraise? How much do I need to fundraise? All these questions are so like unique to your circumstance, the market you exist in, the product you're building, who you're competing against. For us, the stars are kind of aligned in the sense that we didn't need to take on that much capital or excess capital. And so yeah, we just kind of chipped away, carried on. Growth rate was pretty modest, but pretty steady at 14 to 15% month to month on average, which gave us like a really solid revenue base over time. We had a very low cost base, and we had a product that we had, we knew customers like really loved. I think for us, one could ask, why weren't you growing at 30 to 40%? Obviously things weren't perfect. I think from a distribution and go-to-market point of view, like there's things that we would maybe change or do a little bit different, as it would be from a product and engineering point of view. But things were kind of good enough at that point, really, for us to recognize there was a massive opportunity for upside. But again, this all stems back from, this is all come from rather this point of a failed pre-seed round, and kind of stumbling into this opportunity. It wasn't by design, although when I think about startups today, and kind of the idea of going down that pathway by design, I think that's a really interesting conversation of raising a little bit of money, trying to leave like minimal pref stack, essentially, no board seats, control, but at the same time where you're not necessarily burning through your own savings because you've raised a little bit of cash. I think that doing that by design is fascinating. It's obviously difficult, and yeah, happy to talk about that further, of course. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question. I've kind of rambled a little bit there.
No, it's fine. I mean, honestly, a lot of great points. One of the ones I pick on, two things actually. Maybe one is a quick question. I look, as a tech founder myself previously, I look at YC with admiration as an outsider. How common is it that, how many founders, how many startups of a batch, I mean, roughly, do you think will find themselves in your shoes where they don't raise the amount of money they're looking for versus the ones that succeed and raise a lot of money?
I honestly don't know the answer to that question. I think it's probably more than you think. I think people see that a startup's been accepted into YC and all of a sudden straight to the moon. I remember when I got accepted into YC back in 2022, I had a founder message me being like, I guess that's it, I guess you're sold for life. You know, as if there wasn't like, you know, the whole journey ahead of us. Yeah, as if like I don't have, you know, that's just it. Like, it's not how it works. And I think there's an awful lot of YC startups that are just kind of, I mean, there's a bunch that burn out and don't go anywhere. There's a bunch that do incredibly well and go on to build some of the world's biggest businesses and companies that, and tech brands. But there is a kind of subsection in the middle where, you know, they do have some level of product market fit, and they do go on to drive a few million in revenue a year, but maybe they don't just, you know, really push on to or at a level where, you know, the VC model works, and they go on to return the fund plus more, or contribute meaningfully to investors, LPs, and that middle ground, I think, is probably relatively common. I think what's also quite common is people existing in that middle ground who have, you know, maybe raised a large amount of money, and they do have large preference stacks and do have board seats and are kind of just operating in this limbo state, like the kind of zombie companies you hear about. And I think that's probably the most unfortunate area to end up in, because at least if you fail fast, you drop out quickly, you go again. But existing in that kind of limbo state for 5, 10, 15 years with no real opportunity or potential for liquidity is probably the worst thing that can, not the worst thing that can happen, but it's certainly not, you know, an ideal outcome.
Yeah, I mean, so you found yourself almost by accident in this great place where you had a failed pre-seed, but you had enough money to continue to build. You decided to keep the team very small. Like, how many were you at this point?
4 people. So at this point, it was just James and I. Yeah, by the time we exited the business, it was 4 people. And it was, it was 3 engineers and myself. I'm non-technical. And that was, again, very much by design. I just became obsessed with creating the most revenue efficient B2B SaaS company that I could, with the eventual aim of just creating a really, really efficient asset. But yeah, again, it didn't start like that per se.
I mean, you talk about efficient go-to-market. I mean, you talk about it very humbly, but honestly, what you guys achieved is, I would say, from my limited knowledge, was very impressive. You as a sole go-to-market person. Let's talk a bit about that. How did you end up growing from, I would say, 0 to 3,000 MRR? You touched on, say, up to 50K MRR, but I'm sure you went beyond that. Can you talk us through like the strategies? What did you do to be able to build a revenue base with almost nothing? Just you and a budget of how much?
Yeah, so we'd raised like 750K or just less than that. But no, like, look, I come from a sales background. And I think you kind of learn in those environments, especially in startup environments, that like, it's really just down to you. And if you don't do anything, like, nothing is going to happen. And so also, I think what you can learn in working kind of like commercial environments at startups is that, like, it's not pretty. Like, it's usually pretty scrappy and pretty messy, and it's not building some beautiful sales automation workflow that's going to create like 20 leads a week for you to hop on and qualify your buyers or prospects in this kind of methodical way. That reality, maybe it exists for like a few number of startups with like insane PMF, but like for the most part, like, it's pretty dirty. And so there'd be a lot of manual custom outreach in the early days, just really trying to think through what does our ICP look like, what characteristics do they have, how can I communicate with them, even just by email, getting into that kind of discovery call. And then on the discovery call was, obviously you're going to treat that like any other discovery call where you're asking a bunch of questions, but qualifying them, like, do they actually meet your kind of criteria for what defines an ICP? Because what happens next as a startup with a very rough product is you're not just going to kind of dump them in your SaaS product and say good luck. At least that's not what we did. We would put them in a Slack channel, we'd make certain commitments over how to shape the product with them. With no customers, like, or maybe even like 1 or 2 customers in the early days, what we want to say, what the narrative we want to have is, we're going to work with you, make the product work for you. And what that means in reality is saying you need feature 1, 2, and 3. That doesn't exist in the product yet, but that does align with where we want to go with the product, and it aligns with our vision. That was just like one of several tactics we'd use to stimulate early traction. And I think there's one that's fairly common across the I suppose like kind of B2B SaaS world, especially in the early stage. But that also really helped with trust. If we can over-index on communication, if we can over-index on support and make them feel loved, but also come in a kind of really genuine way where we deliver on the promises we make, then that's surely gold to them. And we just try to really be as aggressive on that front as possible for as many customers as we could, without overcommitting and stretching ourselves thin. Obviously, things break and you do stretch yourself too thin, and then you do maybe miss the odd request or something like that does happen eventually, but that's just a growing pain. So that's just like one example again of just being like scrappy, doing things that ultimately don't scale, manual. But I think a lot of startups make the mistake of trying to scale too early, or trying to kind of just shy away from doing the grunt work and just maybe want to be doing the sexy things. But yeah, what we did was not sexy. It was pretty dirty from a kind of time consumption point of view. But it really helped us get to a position where we believed we had some degree of PMF. And over time, we did less of that. And eventually we started signing customers and working with customers, and we didn't have to do any development before, and they would just sign up and use the platform, and they just understood it. And it was like the best feeling ever when we had the first customer sign up and just integrate with no support. Right. But being really, really close to the customer, I think, is a massive, it's not even like a go-to-market hack per se. It's just, it should just be kind of the default expectation as a founder that you need to get unbearably close to your customer and understand kind of every facet of complication of the problem you're solving as you solve it. One person, I will say, James, incredible when it comes to like customer success, customer support. His head's not just down in code, he's actively helping with customers. And I will also say that even though we're a small team of 4, everyone is involved in these Slack channels. I'm not answering technical support questions. That's either James or it's either our 2 developers. And it's really important, I think, at that stage of the company anyway, that developers are involved in customer dialogue, because it creates empathy or potential for empathy with the problem we're solving, even if they're not familiar with the problem. So at least in the early days. So yeah, that would be like the one of the kind of like early go-to-market plays in a way that we really benefited from as we were trying to scale into this kind of more automated way of doing things and onboarding users and customers. And
with this very small team, how much did you grow until you caught the attention of your potential acquirers? How big did you get?
We had some very early acquisition interest. And not necessarily from the company that acquired us, but from other organizations. And we had said, no, not interested, to a couple. This was before we were profitable. And eventually, we started entertaining those conversations just before we, when we kind of got to like Series A level revenue. But it was other, we call it a pre-seed, seed, whatever, it's the same. But what we could have done is said, right, we're going to raise a seed, and we're going to call our initial round a pre-seed, which is kind of what I've alluded to be found on this call already. And we're going to go and raise 4 or 5 million, which is a large seed round, at least it was back then. But then we're going to be kind of stuck. Now we've created a pref stack of like 4 or 5 million and reduced upside. Or we could go and raise like a fairly kind of like an okay Series A, but that would create a large pref stack, would significantly reduce any upside, especially without any secondary involved, which we probably wouldn't get because we weren't, a year ago we weren't flying off the shelf at, with month-to-month growth of 80 to 100%. And so, like looking back, the most sensible decision to create upside was actually using this opportunity to sell the company. Where we had really strong revenue, we were very efficient given there was 4 employees, the product was great, and we had decent acquisition interest from a multitude of parties. So yeah, timing was important, but it wasn't as if the first acquisition prospect we just entertained.
What would you say is essential for other venture-backed founders, ambitious founders, in terms of setting up their companies for acquisition?
Yeah, I would say just kind of what I alluded to before about surrounding yourself with the right people. Again, like if you're a small team, which is kind of where I've come from, and the advice that I have to give is probably relevant to those in similar circumstances, that you can't do everything yourself, and it's just about surrounding yourself with the right people from start to finish to help you make better decisions at points of stress, and just accepting that you can't do everything yourself, that good people around you will really make the difference.
Sorry, what kind of people would you say, if we can dive into, what kind of people did you surround yourself with, given you're a small team? Are you talking about the quality of the small team or external advice service?
Both. Yeah. Look, quality of your small team, people that can take responsibility for tasks when you maybe have responsibilities elsewhere. Maybe it's previous founders or existing founders that are a step or two ahead of you. You can maybe just phone up at any point in time and ask them a few questions. Or maybe it's more of like an emotional support as well. Maybe there's like a family member or a close friend that you can maybe just confide in and have a conversation with about how you're feeling. Even if it's just an ear, you need to talk and rant. Like different people, different things they can help and support with, but it's just surrounding yourself with the right people going through the stressful processes. And again, it all just comes back to giving yourself the best opportunity to make the right decisions.
Entrepreneurship in one word.
I think the biggest one is just like curiosity. Just being like interested in different problems. Exploring different problem lines. That is probably how it all begins.
Okay. And then you've worked for small startups, you worked for bigger ones, you founded a tech startup yourself, and then moving on to something else. What's one skill that you said is transferable across all of this?
For me personally,
Yes.
probably just, I think I've had a lot of trust given to me in different roles at different companies, and that is just to act autonomously as a salesperson, the room to make mistakes, the room to own sales processes end to end and just hustle in that manner. And I think that is very transferable in a kind of entrepreneurial sense. It's just kind of owning those cycles end to end, taking full responsibility and full accountability of those things, and knowing that again, if you don't do anything, nothing's going to happen. So just being kind of very comfortable with that, and that's probably the thing that's benefited me most, really. But also, I'm just kind of like I think people come from different angles. Like, for example, James is probably one of the most talented engineers that I've ever worked with, and also just loves building product. So I think just kind of very complementary in that sense, and very much kind of like struck gold in that manner. But for me, it's very much lies in the kind of like sales and go-to-market side, with also having a kind of like moderate understanding of things that happen at a more kind of deep technical infrastructural level.
Awesome. Final question, maybe a tricky one, but will generative AI disrupt the sales and go-to-market function? If you could choose one, will it be yes or no?
I think that's like a huge, big, broad question, and I would be remiss to say, like, of course it's going to disrupt components of it. I don't know how much of like a sales process for what market, for more product, more context it will disrupt. But yeah, sure, I think these things will all happen in time to an extent, but to what extent I have no idea. I would say that soft skills, having kind of good relationship, regardless of how much AI bleeds into your working capacity, is probably a good thing to invest in. So yeah, I say relationship regardless is always a good thing to invest in. But yeah, I have no idea how much AI is going to dominate sales process from an automation point of view.
I have a view as much less of a sales expert as you are, that AI will mean, to your point, relationship skills, sales skills will be much more valuable in age of AI. That's my prediction. I don't know how it's going to go, but we'll see. On that note, it's been really great having you. Thanks for coming on.
My pleasure.
And wish you all the very best. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Pleasure to be here.